Please rise.
Okay. All the parties are present. Just one question before we bring the jury in. We'll start with closings by the state. Probably take a break between the state and the defense. If we need a break, we'll probably take another break at that point. I'm guessing we're aiming for probably 4 o'clock to be done, given the limitation I put out on the closings for an hour and a half. What I anticipate is saying to the jury, just so you know, start your deliberations, but we'll break at 5:30 tonight, so they don't feel like they have to go all night. I'm changing the plan. My guess is they'll want to do that because I think these are very complex questions and a lot of evidence and stuff, so it'll take them some time anyway. But at 5:30, I would have to bring them back so you'd be here and give them a break and then, tell them not to talk about it, think about it, et cetera, until tomorrow morning. We'd start up at 8:30 tomorrow morning. The question I have, well, I can ask this later, is that, think about it, is if we need to have them meet here, usually I have them go right to the room and start deliberating. I don't have them come back into the courtroom. Everybody okay with that process? Yes. Okay. Okay. So anything we need to talk about before we bring the jury in?
No, Your Honor.
All right, let's bring the jury in. Everybody may be seated. All right. Let's, it's time for closing arguments, and so we'll start with the state. Go ahead, Mr. Torbensen.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. On February 11th of 2023, this defendant forever silenced the voice of Xavier J. Pedrin, or as you've come to know him through this trial, Alex. On February 11th of 2023, this defendant extinguished Alex through her brutal assault and her intentional drugging. Alex's voice cannot tell you what happened, but Alex's body is screaming out to you that he was abused and he was drugged. You saw the graphic photos displayed of Alex at autopsy. You saw the bruising on his body on multiple planes on both sides of his face and head, and throughout all sides of his scalp, including on the top of his head. That was this defendant's stamp of abuse. You heard the levels of Xanax inside of his body. That was so this defendant could quiet his cries. Alex suffered in his final hours as he bled internally from inside of his abdomen. The Xanax slowed his respiratory system. Every breath that he took was pained by that rib fracture he had. With less blood to deliver oxygen throughout his body, his brain swelled and his body began to shut down. until Alex took his last breath. At 9:44 a.m. on February 11th of 2023, Xavier J. Pedrin was declared deceased. If Alex were alive today, he would be 9 years, 10 months, and 4 days old. He would be finishing the 4th grade. Alex is missed by brothers and sisters. Alex's death has left a hole in the heart of his mother, Jenna Love, and his father, Derek Pedrin. Through this defendant's abuse and intentional drugging, this community, your community, has forever lost the potential of Alex's life and what it could have been. Alex mattered. This trial process is about protecting the defendant's constitutional rights and proving that this defendant is responsible for Alex's abuse, Alex's neglect, and his death. At 9:25 a.m. on February 11th of 2023, this defendant called 911. You know it because you heard it. According to that call, she woke up to find Alex on the ground. Twice during that call, she represents that Alex's body was on the ground. She says that Alex was unresponsive and that there was an open bag of her medication on the floor. The defendant reported that she tried CPR on Alex's body to no avail, and that Alex was not breathing. As that 911 call is taking place, deputies Jar and Anderson arrive on scene. It's perhaps one of the fastest responses one could see to a 911 call. The person is still on the call, and the deputies are arriving on scene. When they arrive and this defendant opens the front door, Alex's body is on the bed, not the floor. There is a white sheet under his body to protect the bed from any accidents during the previous evening. That white sheet is undisturbed. It tells you that after Alex was put on that white sheet and in that bed, he did not move to the floor again. It's where he died. Alex's body was in rigor. His left hand was tucked inside of his pants, and his right hand was up towards his head. The left hand being tucked into his pants tells you that his body was not moved from the floor to the bed. As Deputy Jar touched Alex's body and rotated it onto its side, you saw the black substance start to leak out of the side of his mouth. That small movement of just rotating his body to one side caused that substance to start coming out of his mouth. That tells you that this defendant never performed CPR. It was a lie. This defendant told Sergeant Williams that she performed CPR for upwards of 10 minutes. You observed Deputy Jar actually perform CPR and what happened when he just started to perform CPR. You saw the substance start to ooze out from Alex's mouth. And then as the body was moved to the floor, how it continued to ooze out and pool behind his head. That tells you there was no CPR before Deputy Jar arrived on scene. This defendant also said, when she was on the stand, that after trying to perform CPR, she held Alex's body in her arms and cried. You saw the simple movement of moving his body to the side. The simple movement of holding his body in her arms would have caused that same reaction. This defendant didn't hold Alex's body. This defendant didn't cry. You saw her face when the door was opened. Through the investigation into this case, you know that this defendant texted Laura Lee Raines at 9:07 a.m. According to the defendant, she did not immediately notice Alex was not on the bed. You know from the forensic interviews of both Araya and Brantley that they slept upstairs. You know from the testimony of Brantley that he verified once again that he slept upstairs. There were only 2 people in the bed on the evening of February 10th, 2023. This defendant and Alex. And as soon as this defendant woke up, if what this defendant was reporting was true, she would have known immediately that Alex's body was not in that bed. But Alex's body was in that bed. It just wasn't moving. Because he was dead. The children tell you that's what happened. The scene investigation tells you that's what happened. Alex's body tells you that's what happened. Your common sense tells you that is what happened in this case. At 9:20 in the morning, this defendant texts Rafael Suarez. "Something is wrong with my son. Don't come." The text message to Rafael Suarez, the person that she's supposed to go on a date with, goes out before she calls her own mother about Alex. The text message about Rafael Suarez saying don't come over regarding her date goes out before she calls 911. At 9:21 a.m., the defendant calls her mother, not 911. For 52 seconds, they talk. And then over 3 minutes pass after that phone call to her mother, where the testimony establishes that the defendant's mother instructed her to call 911. 3 minutes plus pass until at 9:25 and 52 seconds, she calls 911. There's only one person in the whole world who could have drugged Alex. That person's in the room, and she's seated at that table. Common sense tells you that medication that you take anytime takes effect within an hour or 2. The amount of Xanax in Alex's system, you heard through the defense expert witness, was enough to potentially cause the death of an adult. That tells you about the amount of Xanax in a 6-year-old child's system. This isn't candy. This isn't something that you munch on. This is bitter pills. And they're inside of a 6-year-old child's body. It is impossible for Derek to have drugged Alex. Because if Derek did it, he left the house at 7:15 when he was arrested. If he drugged Alex, Alex would have been feeling the effects of Xanax by 8 to 9 o'clock. He would have been unconscious by 9 to 10 o'clock, dead by 11 to midnight at the latest. It is impossible. You know that Alex was awake until 3 a.m. That's what the defendant said repeatedly and did not deny when she took the stand. You know that she tried to put Alex to sleep around midnight, and he was still awake to the point that she turned the TV back on, and she continued to text Rafael Suarez. You know that Alex was actually awake because Laura Lee Raines, heard over the phone Alex's voice saying what he wanted to do that evening. Alex was awake. Alex was alive. He was well. There's only one person in the whole world who could have staged the scene knowing that Alex had drugs in his system. That person is in this room, and it is the defendant. This defendant told you that she believes the bag that had the medication was up high. That was her testimony just yesterday. Her belief is that that bag was in a place where only adults could reach it. Derek was in jail that night. The only person that had the opportunity and the ability to take that bag and stage that scene is this defendant. This defendant knows what's inside of that bag because it's her medication. She's the only person that had both the opportunity and the ability to stage that scene. Both forensic pathologists that testified in this case agreed that Alex had Xanax in his system after he was beaten. Alex was brutally beaten first, and after he was brutally beaten, that's when the Xanax was in his system. After Alex is brutally beaten, you know that he already has a fractured leg and limited mobility. The beating left him with a broken rib that brought pain to him with every breath. You know that he had abdominal pain with a laceration to his liver and bleeding into the mesentery cavity. You know that that pain would increase over time. You know that he had multiple blows to his head and to his body. For Alex, movement would have meant more pain. And he couldn't even access a bag that was at a height that only adults could grab it. Only this defendant could have done that. The person who administered that drug to Alex would have to know that he was beaten. He would have to know and want to silence him after he was beaten. And they would have the ability and be the only person that had the ability to stage the scene, to put the bag out, to dump the pills inside of the bag, and put the empty canister of the prednisone by Alex's body. The scene investigation conducted by law enforcement verifies that the scene was staged. Every bottle inside that bag had the child safety locks engaged. The pills inside of every single one of those bottles inside the bag matched. The pill bottle outside of the bag had pills inside the bag that matched the prescription. 10 of 12 dumped on the inside of the bag. For you to believe that after Alex was brutally beaten, he would grab and access this bag and then find medication in that bag, you would have to believe that he would A, be able to open the bag and unzip it after being beaten, B, engage the child safety lock, C, empty out all the pills in the bag except for the pills that were Xanax, and somehow magically ingest only the Xanax, and Xanax at a level that would kill an adult potentially. Those are the facts that the defense is trying to sell you, and ladies and gentlemen, do not buy it. The scene investigation in this case also tells you so much more. Alex's pants are stained with cotton candy. There's an empty cotton candy container on the floor. There's also, if you look close enough, an empty can of Red Bull. And you know from the autopsy results that Alex had caffeine in his system. You know that it was a problem for this defendant that Alex would get up in the middle of the night. That's a problem that this defendant created. But Alex would get up in the middle of the night. And like any 6-year-old child, he sought sugar, he sought Red Bull, he sought the things that taste good. And so his pants are stained with cotton candy. The testimony of Investigative Sergeant Amundsen established that there was cotton candy particles throughout the bedroom. It stained the carpet, it was on the wood. The pieces that he had collected from the bed, he originally sees and then he picks up and he says, "This looks like cotton candy. It looks like what I'm seeing everywhere else."
Overruled. Keep on going.
You know from phone analysis that this defendant was texting Rafael Suarez during the evening of February 10th into the morning of February 11th over 160 times. Those text messages actually start at 6:18 p.m. while Derek is still at the residence. Derek arrives home from work sometime after 5:30 in the evening, and she is texting another man. And that's her right. You know that the relationship between Derek and this defendant is toxic to say the least. But those text messages establish a number of things. That she's awake till just before 2 a.m., the last time she sends a message, and then after 2 a.m., when she's not texting Rafael Suarez, she and Alex are left awake and alone. This defendant beat Alex. The beating was a brutal beating. You saw the bruising on his body. During the welfare check conducted by Deputy Kerneen, he observed Alex, not once, but twice. He came into the residence and he saw one old injury above his eye and one bruise on the back of his leg. Deputy Kerneen also told you what Alex was wearing. The only thing that Alex was wearing at that time, when he looked a second time, was a pull-up diaper. The other thing that Deputy Kerneen told you is that between the 2 times when he saw Alex in the residence, Alex repositioned his body. He moved his body on the couch. No other bruising, no redness, no signs of tears or recent crying. And in this defendant's own words, Alex was asleep. In this defendant's own words, the next morning, to Sergeant Williams, Alex was asleep from 5 p.m. to 7:30 to 8 p.m., the entire time that Derek was home. That's consistent with what Derek told you when he took the stand. Derek said when he came home that there was a bucket of throw-up that he took and cleaned up. And then he was cleaning up around the house. Both of those facts were verified by Deputy Kerneen. Because when Deputy Kerneen comes over after conducting the welfare check, the bucket next to Alex Xavier is empty. The throw-up has been cleaned up. But when Deputy Kerneen arrives at the residence and he's looking in the windows, and Derek has no idea that law enforcement is there, Deputy Kernine testified and told all of you Derek was sweeping and cleaning the kitchen, which is exactly what Derek said he was doing. Here, the defendant's own words seal her fate. You saw the text message at 9:06 p.m. that this defendant sent to Rafael Suarez. She said, "I just showered." That text message is in response to a message from Mr. Suarez asking, "What are you doing?" From 7:47 p.m. through 8:29 p.m., there is no activity on the defendant's cell phone. From 7:47 p.m. to 8:29 p.m., her phone with no activity is consistent with a person showering. What's more, the photograph that you saw this morning, the selfie, the first selfie that she took, is consistent with someone who got out of the shower within a half hour. Her hair still looks wet. She's got a bathrobe on. She has no makeup on her face. And then within 20 minutes, she has makeup on, her glasses on, but the same bathrobe on. She was improving her appearance because she was having an ongoing conversation with Mr. Suarez. But make no mistake about it, she showered. Why is that shower important? Because this defendant told you when she took the stand yesterday that she would never shower with dirty underwear and a bottle that was used for urine in the bathtub. The defendant wants you to believe that Derek came home, became angry at Alex for using the bathroom in his pants, took him into the bathroom, and brutally assaulted him. And she says the proof of that is the dirty underwear and the bottle that was in the tub. The dirty underwear and the bottle that were in the tub couldn't have been there when she showered. They came after the fact. It came after the fact because they were photographed the next morning. The defendant's story that Derek beat Alex in that bathroom is just that. It's a story. She's attempting to escape responsibility from her actions, something that you know she does from Dr. Endres. And this defendant herself changes the story. She went from showering earlier to not showering. Think about all the children that were home when this defendant says that that beating took place. Major is in the room right next door. He's been interviewed multiple times. He would have heard that brutal beating because this defendant reports that she heard it from upstairs. Brantley is home on that same floor. Araya is home. The defendant's story is not supported by Deputy Kernine's observations. It's not supported by what this defendant originally reported to law enforcement, which is that Alex was asleep that entire time, which is completely supported by Deputy Kernine's observations, which is completely supported by what Derek told all of you, which is completely supported by the scene with the garbage can being emptied and Derek sweeping. You also know it didn't happen because Laura Lee heard Alex's voice on that phone call at 10:30 in the evening. You also know it didn't happen because this defendant reported that Alex was fine that evening. Multiple times, she told law enforcement. At the end of performing CPR, when Deputy Anderson tells the defendant that Alex is gone, the defendant's response is, how is that possible? He was fine. After being in this trial for the last 2.5 weeks, it's really easy to want to blame Derek Pedrin. You know that Derek Pedrin is violent with women. He is. You saw disturbing and disgusting conduct on multiple videos that involved Derek. At the beginning of this trial, during my opening statement, I told all of you, Derek is a domestic abuser, and by God, he is. Large portions of this trial actually felt like this trial was a domestic violence trial and Derek Pedrin was on trial. Perhaps one of the benefits of this trial be that Derek Pedrin was faced with his domestic violence in those videos and his conduct. Will it change his behavior? Who knows, but one can hope. But don't fall for this defendant's smokescreen. Do not let her use his domestic violence against her to allow her to get away with a homicide of a child. You were told during opening statements by the defense that there were going to be multiple witnesses, one of which was going to come in here and tell you that they witnessed Alex Xavier get struck and beat more than 12 times. That didn't happen.
Judge, completely improper objection.
Go on to, what? No, overruled. Go ahead.
You heard you're going to see multiple videos of the same. There's one video that's been admitted where Derek Pedrin is yelling horrible things at Alex inside that van. Things that are abusive. There's another video from years ago where the children are tapping their heads and they say, "Dad just hit me." Those are the two videos you saw that are supposed to establish that Derek is a child abuser. Context also matters. Deputy Paff, during his testimony, talked about a prior domestic violence offense that he responded to the residents just a week or so before. He talked about Alex and Derek's interaction during that time. In fact, it came up again because on the evening of February 10th, Derek said, "Can I say goodbye to my kids?" And the deputies say, "You remember how it went last time. We can't do it again for that reason." Days before, they could not pull Alex off of his father. They could not pull Alex off of Derek. And it created a situation for almost 20 minutes where law enforcement had to work to separate them. That encounter tells you what you need to know about Alex's relationship and love for his father. Make no mistake about it, Derek has responsibility. He has responsibility for Alex's neglect. He has responsibility for not getting Alex to the doctor on time. He has responsibility for not ensuring that Alex was attending school. He has responsibility for bringing drugs into the home for this defendant to use. But Derek's responsibility is not for you to decide today. You are deciding this defendant's responsibility. And his responsibility cannot be an excuse for this defendant to avoid responsibility for her actions. You have heard even more compelling evidence that this defendant is responsible for Alex's abuse and his death. the defendant's own children. In a forensic interview that was conducted by Major, and remember the dynamics of the forensic interview. At the time that law enforcement originally responds on February 11th, they believe this may be an overdose of prednisone. There's bruising on Alex Xavier's body on the outside, but they don't know about all the trauma on the inside. In an abundance of caution, law enforcement sets up forensic interviews of the children. Major goes and stays with his dad, a dad who has no idea what's happening inside the home of the defendant. Brantley and Araya stay with the defendant's family. They are with separate families and think about what they report in those forensic interviews. Major says that this defendant kicks Alex a lot in his chest and in his face. That this defendant kicked Alex the last time Major saw Alex. That'd be the night before he died. That this defendant has choked Alex on multiple different occasions. That this defendant gets mad at Alex because Alex gets up at night for snacks. This defendant puts hot sauce on his food as a punishment. That this defendant stomps or steps on Alex's chest. Major was interviewed a second time, less than a month later, on March 2nd of 2023. During that forensic interview, Major talked about the purported stairway fall and what this defendant did after that purported fall down the stairs by bending Alex's leg until Alex cried out in pain, and the defendant told Alex to be quiet or she would bend it further. Major also talked about seeing this defendant choke Alex during that same encounter. Brantley was interviewed originally on February 12th. Brantley talked about Alex stealing, that this defendant got mad for the stealing and kicked Alex in the chest, that Alex whined and winced in pain. Brantley made a statement in that forensic interview about how this defendant in the past used a spoon to strike Alex. When he was asked if there's any choking in the house, he said, yes, my mom does it, and she does it to Alex. Both Major and Brantley independently say all of this happens when Derek is not home. And Brantley says, the evening before Alex passed, he was asleep upstairs. Brantley made statements in that forensic interview about green poisonous water. He made statements about guns upstairs, diamonds upstairs, and the spoon being upstairs. Those statements have been represented as untrustworthy just because of the nature and the content of what they contain. This is a 5-year-old child talking. Do not judge a statement of a 5-year-old child from the perspective of an adult. I like to take my kids to sporting events. When they're much younger, I would take them to Brewer games. When someone would ask me what happened at that Brewer game, I would talk about the pitching, who hit well, what the final score was, and how the Brewers played overall. The perspective of my daughters, who are much younger, would talk about what they got to eat. Did Dad buy licorice? Did we have ice cream? Did we go to the PlayStation inside the stadium? We had the exact same experience, but the perspectives that we had as an adult and as children were different. Brantley talked about green poisonous water. Remember the scene photographs? There was green water in the toilet. Brantley talked about his dad having guns. How many times in those videos that we are shown were there actual arguments about firearms in that house? It came up more than once. Brantley talked about diamonds being upstairs in that same area. It makes sense that jewelry and a gun or those type of items are all going to be stored in a safe area in the house. That's a 5-year-old child's perspective. That's what he's describing. Remember that. Brantley was interviewed a second time after Derek recorded Brantley. You saw Derek record Brantley. You saw the full recording. Derek actually asked open-ended questions. Tell me what you just said. What happened after that? What happened after that? Those are open-ended questions, the kind that you heard from Danielle on the stand that you should use when you're interviewing a child. Based on those open-ended questions, a second forensic interview is set up of Brantley. During this interview, Brantley said that this defendant pushed Alex down the stairs. But what's important about what he was saying is he's talking about a push down the stairs before death. He's not talking about the push down the stairs that happened resulting in the broken leg. He's talking about something that happened within the time frame right before Alex died, where this defendant was abusive of Alex. He says that Alex would get up at night for food, and he describes how this defendant pushed Alex down the stairs. Brantley says it happened the day before Alex died. Why is that important? Because when Brantley took the stand and talked about that fall, he said the exact same thing when he testified in this courtroom before all of you. That there was a push down the stairs the day before Xavier died. You know the dynamics of where each one of these children lived in separate households. And you saw both independently testify to the vivid abuse they witnessed at the hands of this defendant. Major took the stand in the very same courtroom where his own mother is in the courtroom. Think about that from the perspective of both Major and Brantley. They came into the courtroom and they testified in the same room as their own mother about what she did to their own brother. Major said that the defendant would punch, hit, kick, and choke Alex. He said all of these things happened while Derek was at work. He described a specific instance of kicking in the kitchen where the defendant kicked Alex while Alex was on the ground, kicked him multiple times. He talked about another incident that happened in the living room where mom, quote, kicked Alex everywhere on his body. He talked about multiple instances of choking, including one that happened the day before Alex died, where the defendant was on top of Alex, straddling him. And he gave a really powerful and a really vivid description of Alex's response, his bodily response to being choked. He talked about how his arms and legs were flailing. Think about that. Think about that, because that is a natural response to someone choking and trying to fight off being choked. And he's telling you with his eyes what he saw this defendant do. He talked about how this defendant would punch Alex, and he demonstrated with his fists. He talked about how Alex would be treated differently with food. He'd be kept from eating. He only got crust from the pizza. He'd get hot sauce on his food. He was treated differently. He was made to sit on the floor if he didn't finish his food on time. Talked about how Alex would get up in the middle of the night. The defendant told you that Alex got up in the middle of the night. Brantley, who has not been living with Major, has been living with Derek, verified Major's account of events. He described this defendant assaulting Alex over and over. Talked about Alex being on the ground and the defendant kicking Alex in his chest. Brantley said this defendant would abuse Alex a lot, that she would routinely choke Alex. Alex's face would turn red and sometimes purple. This defendant would choke, kick, and hit Alex on more than 3 occasions. During this trial, he was asked about food for the first time. He says this defendant would put hot sauce on Alex's food. This defendant would add more hot sauce if Alex wouldn't eat the food with the hot sauce on it. Years passed between those original interviews in February of 2023. Major was now 12 years old when he took the stand. Brantley was 9. They have grown up. Their vocabulary has improved. They have more words to tell you what happened, and they use that vocabulary and those words to tell you what they've witnessed in their home with their own eyes at the hands of this defendant. Ladies and gentlemen, child abuse is a crime that happens behind closed doors. Perpetrators of child abuse rely on that fact. They rely on the fact that the public is shielded from their actions, that you can't see what happens in the home, that the victims of child abuse are people that they have relationships with, that the witnesses of the child in the home are people that they have relationships with. That provides perpetrators of child abuse like this defendant with protection. But this defendant's own children told you about this defendant's abuse of Alex. And if you're wondering why, and the state doesn't have to prove motive, there's a couple things for you to consider. This defendant suffered a traumatic brain injury by Alex's mother, Jenna Love, hitting her with a baseball bat. Alex's father, Derek, has repeatedly abused this defendant. Alex as a child, every time she looks at Alex, is a reminder of Jenna Love and being assaulted and having to take care of Jenna Love's son, and a reminder of Derek's domestic violence and having to take care of Derek's son. And if you still have doubt, and you shouldn't by now, you can consider this defendant's prior conduct and whether it establishes the identity of the person who abused and neglected Alex Xavier. You know that in 2011, Haley suffered a traumatic brain injury. Haley was admitted to the hospital with multiple skull fractures. According to this defendant, Haley suffered that traumatic brain injury from a fall downstairs. In 2013, Haley was admitted to the hospital yet again after living with this defendant and Dustin Barnes for a period of 6 months. In those preceding months, Haley went from the 80th percentile in weight to the 6th percentile in weight. She was losing hair. She had a fractured foot and potential fractures in her hands. Haley was not this defendant's child. There was another child the same age as Haley that lived in that house, and the two were treated different. Alex is not this defendant's child. There are children of a similar age to Alex in his home. According to those children, Alex was treated different. You can only use the evidence from 2011 and 2013 if the similarities from that evidence, and in this case, help you identify who the perpetrator of the abuse was. I want to talk a little bit about child neglect. Alex had over 100 absences from school in 2 years. In a little over the half year that he attended the first grade, he had 40 absences in 75 days. The principal of Alex's school testified about the harm that is caused to children when they don't attend school. It impacts their growth, it impacts their development, it impacts their functioning, it impacts their social skills. You also saw Alex's appearance at the time of his autopsy. He was extraordinarily thin. He was dehydrated. Conditions that were consistent with what the children described with terms of him eating or not being able to drink, because if he drank, it would cause him to have to go to the bathroom. You know that Alex had a broken leg. You know that Alex wasn't taken for medical treatment for days after that broken leg. Derek deserves responsibility for that, but so does this defendant. There are many ways in which you can get a child to a medical facility without having to drive them there. There are many actions that this defendant could have sought to try and help Alex. And I want to go back to Alex's death. A person who intentionally administers a drug to a child to put that child to sleep has a responsibility to watch over that child. When you engage in that extraordinarily dangerous conduct, that's not an excuse for you to go to sleep and hope that everything turns out right the next morning so you can go on that date. But that's what this defendant did. Giving Xavier drugs and then going to bed after he is knocked out and not watching over him contributed to his death. Because if there was action taken, monitoring to counteract the effects of those drugs, Xavier could still be alive. In this trial, you get to consider this defendant's words and actions. She never disclosed the abuse to the children outside of one arguable 911 call to police, to friends, to family, except for one video that she sent to Laura Lee. And what were her instructions with the video that she sent to Laura Lee? Hold on to it in case I need it. Not help me, not help my children, not protect me or protect my children. Hold on to this in case I need it. You know that this defendant got rid of the SD cards. Special investigator or investigative Sergeant Amundsen saw those SD cards on February 11th, 2023. He didn't collect them that day, and I imagine he's kicking himself for it. This defendant had the password, the ability to log in, and when you log on to the account, it sends a notification to the email of that account. We saw the notification when Investigative Sergeant Amundsen logged in. And as he's logged in, the videos are being deleted. The holder of that account would get the notification and be able to sign in and delete those videos. This defendant was deleting those videos. You know that after the death of Alex Xavier, Derek was meeting with law enforcement, gave a statement to law enforcement, was cooperating with law enforcement. And this defendant's response to that was to tell him he should not do it. This defendant's words, her actions show her guilt. Her lies about the shower establish her guilt. After I've been speaking to you for a while, I'm now going to talk about the law, the most exciting part. That was supposed to be funny. None of you laughed. Count one is first-degree intentional homicide. It has two elements. The defendant caused the death of Alex, and the defendant caused the death of Alex with the intent to kill. I want to talk about the intent to kill. Intent to kill includes language that the defendant's actions were practically certain to cause the result. You saw the brutal beating that Alex Xavier sustained at this defendant's hands. You saw the drugging and the amount of drugs in his system. There can be no conclusion, but each of those combined demonstrates that it is practically certain to take Alex Xavier's life. It is difficult to fathom a caretaker, someone who fills a parent-like role, extinguishing the life of a child. And for that reason, you have lesser included offenses to consider. You have the ability to consider whether or not the defendant's actions were intentional or utterly reckless. Make no mistake about it, it is the state's position that this death was intentional. The beating, the brutal beating, combined with the administration of a drug at that level, made it practically certain that Alex Xavier was going to die. Count two, child neglect. One of the elements is a person responsible for the welfare of a child. A girlfriend to a parent is a person responsible for the welfare of a child because that parent is using or employing that person as a caretaker for their children. You have to find 3 acts of child neglect during that time frame, and you don't have to even agree on which 3 acts, as long as all of you agree that there were 3 acts of neglect. There's medical neglect, there's educational neglect, there's nutritional neglect in this case, supervisory neglect, and there's multiple forms of each. All you as a jury has to do is find 3 or agree that there were 3, and you don't even have to agree on which 3 constitute the 3. You do have to agree on the one that led to death. For that, the defendant had a responsibility to Alex to watch over him after giving him that drug, and she failed in that responsibility. I've talked about that already. Count 3, repeated acts resulting in death. Again, you have to find 3 acts, and you don't have to agree on all 3. The testimony of Major gives you 3. The testimony of Brantley gives you 3. Alex Xavier's body gives you more than 3. From that, it's easy to find 3 acts of child abuse that this defendant inflicted on Alex Xavier. Did the defendant cause bodily harm is the first element for each one of those acts. Bodily harm includes physical pain, injury, or impairment of physical condition. All Alex Xavier had to have was pain or impairment of his condition from this defendant's acts. That the defendant acted intentionally. Kicking someone is an intentional act. Punching someone is an intentional act. Hitting someone is an intentional act. And by God, choking a 6-year-old child is an intentional act. Did one of those acts cause the death of Alex? This is where you do have to agree. You have to agree on the act that caused his death. The testimony of the medical examiners give you 2 different ways. The abdominal injuries that Xavier had were a substantial condition resulting in his death. That's what Dr. Quinton testified to. He listed as the #1 cause on his report. Impairment of his physical condition by administering a drug is another way of committing child abuse. It's an intentional act, it impairs his physical condition, and the administration of Xanax caused his death. Either one of those, as long as all 12 agree, is sufficient for finding and answering that question, yes. Dr. Endres said in her testimony that this defendant avoids responsibility, that this defendant projects blame on other people. You witnessed that through the defense testimony over 2 days. There was something that the defendant said twice during her testimony that all of you should agree with. This defendant told you twice that Alex was murdered. Alex was murdered. Alex was murdered by this defendant. This defendant does everything she can to avoid personal responsibility. Give her a lesson in personal responsibility and find her guilty.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Torbensen. What I'd like to do is take a break, obviously this long, so we're going to take a 15-minute break. We'll start back up at 2 o'clock. I want to address one thing before we break up. Just to address the objection that the defense made, the argument was burden shifting. It was on the issue of did the defense present witnesses about Derek Pedrin specifically?
It was about a witness that. Possible witness that was referenced in opening that.
Can you pull the microphone a little bit closer? Sorry.
It was about a possible witness in opening that the state faulted Ms. Dikeman for failing to call. That's black letter burden shifting.
I don't think it's burden shifting at all. It was something that the defense said would happen that did not happen, and I was pointing that out.
Mm-hmm. I think pointing out something that's said at opening that doesn't happen during the trial doesn't necessarily, it can be burden shifting, but given that I don't think it shifted the burden overall. It was also in the context of talking about Mr. Pedrin's abuse. That's what I had the impression it was about. If it was, I'll just say this, it was harmless if at all. The burden is very much clearly stated, and then the instructions will be restated. One thing I should say that I usually read 160 before I do closings. I realized I hadn't read that. I will do 160 after I do closings, which actually talks about, about evidence. It doesn't talk about the burden per se, but we actually were talking about the burden all throughout the instructions. And it also goes on about returning a verdict in 515. So at this point in time, the court, I overruled the objection, moved forward, partially because I didn't want to make, a lot of times they're trying to avoid pointing out something that could become a problem. So in this case, I don't think it was. I don't think it was clearly burden shifting. So at worst, it was ambiguous. At best, it wasn't. So the court will go ahead and we'll get back at 2 o'clock.